Today we're going to talk about clauses. Clauses meaning a group of words that contains a subject and a verb, not Santa Claus. And we're going to focus in on determining the difference between a dependent or subordinate clause and an independent or main clause, identifying them in a sentence. This is review. There are two kinds of clauses, independent and subordinate. An independent clause is a clause that expresses a complete thought and can stand alone. It is a sentence. These are examples of independent clauses. They've got a subject and a predicate like all clauses do. And if I start them with a capital letter and end with a period, they become a sentence. Subordinate or dependent clauses do not express a complete thought, and they cannot stand by themselves as a sentence. Here are some examples. Because he memorized a poem, when Mary reads her poem at school, since many people enjoy poetry. And these cannot stand by themselves because of these subordinate conjunctions. A subordinate clause will be a fragment when the clause begins with a capital letter and ends with a period or a question mark. This would be considered a grammatical error. What makes a clause subordinate or dependent? A clause is dependent when it begins with a subordinate word. Examples are when, while, which, because, since, unless. You guys should have written these subordinate conjunctions in your notes on Tuesday, and also you did the IXL HH3 identifying subordinate conjunctions. So hopefully those are becoming more recognizable. A subordinate clause needs an independent clause to create a true sentence. And we'll get into talking about these in the coming weeks. These are called complex sentences. Because he memorized a poem, I can't just stop there, I have to add more. Cooper will receive extra credit. Or I can reorganize the two clauses. Cooper will receive extra credit because he memorized a poem. Both of those sentences are grammatically correct. Notice that when a subordinate clause comes first, it is usually followed by a comma. When the rain stops, the game will begin. When the rain stops is a subordinate clause, so it begins the sentence, so it is followed by a comma. And then when the subordinate clause comes last, there is generally no comma. The game will begin when the rain stops. We are hoping that you are getting closer to identifying the difference between independent and subordinate, and we'll go through a couple examples. Identify if this group of words is an independent clause or a subordinate clause. The weather station took aerial photos. While the storm was raging. Independent or subordinate? Since the first photos were taken, independent or subordinate? The storm has increased in intensity, independent or subordinate? When the wind blows fiercely, independent or subordinate? Now that you've finished with this review, the next thing to do for today's at-home assignment is to complete the quizzes on clauses. And it's very similar to this. You might have your notes sitting next to you, and you'll identify whether a group of words is an independent clause or a subordinate clause.